Without further ado, I'll give you a bit of a brief understanding of who I am and what FINEOS is and why we might have a perspective that could be interesting for this conference. It's not really a big upping about the company FINEOS, but more to give you an understanding of where we see trends, how we see the market, and why we have a perspective to bring. As Tony said, I've spent 13 years prior to FINEOS with Munich Re. I joined FINEOS about 2 years ago. And what attracted me was FINEOS is a provider of core systems, strong focus on claim systems to life and health, so long-term insurance. FINEOS really doesn't have a footprint in the short-term insurance market. It's very much focused. That's one thing where when you seek out partners, you need to find partners that have specialism and expertise. And I think the world is becoming more niche, where general wisdom is no longer going to get us to where we need to get to. You need to find true experts in a particular field. FINEOS has a strong presence in Australia and New Zealand. About 70% of the group life insurance market in Australia is handled by FINEOS, particularly the claims. We have 7 of the top 10 life and health insurers in the United States. Presence, as I said, in New Zealand, also in Canada, etc. Around the world, elsewhere, it is patchy. We have clients in my home country, Ireland, in the UK, the Netherlands, etc. But we have a really strong position in those markets. And that has given us, I hope, something to bring to this about how we've seen change being driven by insurers and then in a perfect circle being responded to by insurers. The one thing that Lee talked about, and which I suppose is the origin of the concept behind this conference of thriving in the age of agile, is that we really are now entering an uncertain world. There's a term, a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world, where previously the focus of change was on growing efficiency. Now we seem to have change almost forced upon us. We need to respond to that change. We need to be able to find a way, as the conference organizers have said, to thrive in that change, to not just have that change happen to us, but to be, if I could abuse your snail on a skateboard analogy, we need to be a snail on a surfboard, and we need to surf that change. We need to be able to control, to adapt, and to thrive on it. The thing that I want to talk about a little bit is about how sometimes we can be a bit like, we all know that analogy of the water, which is heated gently to boiling point, and the frog never notices the change happening. And I want to draw your attention as a starting point to this, to changes that are happening. If we look at the tech world, cloud computing, 2 pieces of data over the last decade, the amount of growth of cloud computing and software as a service has really grown from 20-something billion to nearly 160 billion. So it's dramatic growth. And that's happened not just in insurance, but across all industries. The percentage of corporate data that is stored in the cloud has changed from being less than 1/3 to today, pretty much 2/3. So that is a dramatic change. And because we've been living through it day by day, we may not have noticed it. Sometimes you need to take a step out, to take a longer period of time to see how change is happening, or even sometimes drill in. And I'll give you 2 further kind of examples. This one being a view over an indication of change, the number of patents granted in the United States as one indicator. There can be many indicators. But if you take a look over that over all time, so going right back to 1790, you can see that for a long period, reasonably static, then it goes into a period of growth that we can typically understand. But in recent years, since it really, I apologize, hockey sticked up, it has really shown huge growth. And that's an indicator of the amount of technology change and amount of change in our society. And there are these kind of inflection points where if you look at that, you could probably say, around 2000, it changed. These things can subtly change as well. Very, very subtly changed. Lee's opening remarks, he talked about how Africa has 515 million individual smartphone users, mobile phone users, smartphone users. But actually, if you drill down into that, there was a period when the number of smartphone users around the world was sub 1 million. In the years 2006, 7, 8, 9, it was, again, reasonably static. And then suddenly there was this change. And so you can date these moments in society when society is about to change, our industry is about to change. And I think we are in one of those right now, particularly if you look at the history of technology hype. There was a lot of hype around the metaverse. It's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that actually what I'm hearing now about AI and generative AI is a replay of just hype. I'd put it to you that this is actually really something which is changing very quickly and behind the scenes, and therefore a little bit subtly, the world around us. And I'll give you one last moment where, again, Lee referred to the COVID times, the pandemic times, where the behaviors of people changed dramatically. And we know, you look at this graph I put up here about e-commerce sales growth in the US, and you can understand precisely why from 2019 to 2020, there was this massive spike. And these were the pandemic times when society changed. I think we can also say that history, when we look back 4 or 5 years from now, we'll also be able to point to the moment where generative AI and AI more widely really came to play a role in society. And we saw one of those dramatic changes. The piece around that as business people is that some of us, you're probably familiar with this, what I'm going to put out here. They call it the PPT framework, people, process, technology. On the right here, you see this triangle. You may have, hoping that some of you or many of you have seen these before as means of adapting to organizational change. These are the models that industry, including ours, has used to manage and adapt to change. What's not really said about that is the history of it. A PPT framework is the dominant paradigm, as I say there, to integrate human factors, process efficiency, and technology advancements. This was first put out by gentleman Carl Liebert in the journal Management Science. But that was so we are using today a model of thinking that was very novel and revolutionary, in fact, in 1964. But I put out there that sometimes the tools, the thinking and the mindset that we bring to change have their place in another time. So in this case, it's quite possible that that PPT framework belongs here in this period of time where it was born, where the world was about trying to achieve operational efficiency rather than, as we've had here, thrive in the age of agile. Put to you, and apologies that I cannot compare these two things. This is my random thinking. I'll leave it, the recognized academic and real expert. So I'm being a bit cheeky by suggesting maybe we need something different. But what I'm putting out here is one new approach. I suppose what I'm trying to say is we need to look at new approaches. Not that this is the correct one, but we need to look at new approaches. And instead of the three pieces of people, process, technology clearly remains the bedrock of this change. But I think data is something which I think needs to be elevated to a topic in its own right. And again, in terms of people, it's less about the efficiency of work practices, but changing our culture and our mindset. Particularly in our industry, in the insurance industry, data is the heart, has always been the heart. So we use and generate data both in underwriting and claims, but also it's used to personalize and provide customer insights to be efficient and also to ensure compliance. And similarly, to thrive in the age of agile, I think we need to move from being efficient to being adaptable, to being flexible. Lee spoke about collaboration. I think he was maybe a little down on South Africa compared to Ghana and Rwanda, the other nations and societies that he referred to. But I think globally, collaboration and teamwork are the way forward, both within our organizations. So to break down silos within insurance organizations, where that is the role of the underwriting team. No, it's everybody's role and everybody's responsibility. But I would also say to you, collaboration has a role outside the organization. You pick your partners. Again, I'm echoing things which Lee and I was talking about. I think that the customer's expectations have changed. If we're going to meet our customers' expectations, we need to have a focus on them. And These are times of continuous learning, of really leaning into the problem solving. It's more about thinking, less about doing than it has been in the past. And of course, as I say, the technology of the past, the technology, as always, plays a key role. Now it's more about scalability and flexibility, about interoperability between different systems. Obviously, in our world, and particularly looking at the data that we hold for our clients, security and compliance, very important. And user experience and automation are the ways where we will scale and thrive. What I've done is I have deliberately overlooked, not mentioned advanced analytics and artificial intelligence. What I'm going to do is maybe later in this talk, I'm going to talk about a couple of examples from our industry where those are playing a role already today, and maybe highlight that. This being TechFest, I'll talk about technology. Before I do that, if you don't mind, I'll just pick a couple of words from that side: continuous collaboration, and put them in the context here of technology. We're all familiar with the idea that we can't embark on a change that we wish to do because our IT function is focused on a major upgrade. In fact, I was talking to an organization with a admin system, and that's really consuming an awful lot of the IT team's thinking at the moment. Equally, there can be claims implementation projects or IFRS 17 projects, and we'll all have experienced in recent times when we couldn't get our desires into the technology queue because there was something that was some project that was going on. The good news and the bad news, again, to be a bit like Lee, there's a bit of bad news in that, which is those projects in the future are never going to end. It is going to be a continuous evolution of systems. And so we need to adapt to a world on all sides where we are able to do multiple things at once and not have these mega projects consume the totality of our businesses. That in fact we be constantly evolving and improving our systems and adapting so that we thrive. The other piece around that is that, again, we cannot do that alone. If Lee is correct in that South Africa is starting from a place further back potentially than other nations in terms of collaboration, one of the great things is that South Africa has proven itself to be a very rapid or a country to respond to change. And I think collaboration is really key, both in terms, as I said, of within an organization, breaking down the silos, but also about finding partners. These are the days to find partners with expertise in terms of wisdom and knowledge around implementation, around change, around systems. So finding service partners can deliver with and alongside you, but also, I suppose, finding those technology partners who are going to take over some of the undifferentiated heavy lifting for organizations. And again, I think finding partners where they will do more of the generic industry-wide work so that you as an insurer can apply your unique value on top of that is really key. So if I go back to my slide and I take the focus on technology, as I said, and I'll go through each of these points in turn. Scalability and flexibility is essential because I think we are going to see a dramatic growth in the interactions that we have with our clients, in the speed at which our clients expect a response, and that this has to come through growth in computing power and flexibility. This can't really be easily achieved by what's sometimes called a lift and shift. So where you take an existing system and port it into the cloud, because you have taken away the hardware near aspects of that. You're still working within a kind of a restricted environment. Really what you're looking for is this microservices, containerized architecture where storage can be elastic and compute power can be elastic. And most importantly, where ideally it's an API first implementation where you can have a system where 3 years later, you can come up with an idea about we should be doing X, Y, Z, and you can draw on the data from other systems or engage with other systems without having to build an API, without having to do the infrastructural piece as the phase one of any project. You need to have this from the ground up. The other piece I would say around the complexity of these systems is if these are going to be constantly evolving, then they need to be, you need a degree of automation around deployment, configuration, etc. And these become ever more complex systems and they need strong monitoring and performance management. I would say ideally what you want in that is as an insurance company is to be handing that out to a vendor, whoever that may be, but choose your partner wisely. And that should really be their area, their responsibility, because it must be their area of expertise. I mentioned that I was going to give a couple of examples of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence. I believe that this is going to be a dramatic factor for change in our industry. And to take one slightly grungy example, which is about document processing, let me say that in our FINEOS world, we work quite a lot with large employee benefits and group risk insurers. And in that particular part of the long-term insurance market, there are some very complex, what they call sometimes census files. So if a new organization is becoming a client of you as an insurer, you'll get a file containing ages and roles and salaries of all employees. And actually, those come generally from their success factors or Oracle or Workday, their HR systems, but they come often through a broker, so they're manipulated to make sense for the broker. And quite often just making sense of those files can take days and add days to the experience for the user. And this is something where predictive analytics and artificial intelligence play a really strong role. Identifying, this particular column, this is clearly a date. It's clearly too recent to be the date of birth. So it must be their date of joining the company, and to go through and cleanse that. We implemented something in 2022 for a US client, and to show the kind of heavy lifting that these systems can do, they reduced that from 15 days of processing the files at ingress down to 3. And actually at the end of the first year, it had processed 33,000 files containing data on 20 million individual employees, members. And so that kind of behind the scenes, unseen and unloved use of AI is somewhere where it really is doing this, as I said, this heavy lifting to free up time, which is really almost a waste of human expertise to be working through. This is really a perfect example of something where the use of AI and the sophisticated computing power can solve that. That's a US example. From Singapore, predictive analytics and AI is being used to predict a final underwriting decision for new applicants in long-term insurance, life insurance. In this case I'm talking about here, it's not trying to simply use AI to underwrite, but in fact to sit in front of the underwriting stage and triage. So to be able to identify this cohort of applicant can get a very light touch at 4 or 5 questions. Anyone on this call who's familiar with certainly long-term insurance underwriting knows that the holy grail wouldn't it be great to just be able to have 4 questions and have someone on risk. So this is able to select out those individuals who could merit that type of very light touch underwriting and give them a much simpler user journey, and allowing then a much smaller cohort of applicants to go through to a more full-scale, rigorous underwriting. Initially with an automated underwriting system, one of these reflexive question underwriting systems, but potentially then onwards to manual underwriting in some cases. And what this has had is actually a cost benefit as well as an experience benefit for the applicant, a cost benefit for the insurer, in that they are now getting an awful lot less medical evidence by separating out those who can go through on very light touch underwriting. They've identified that they don't have to seek external evidence for that cohort. Another example, this one, I have to say, is very much from the US, and please don't read into this that I'm suggesting that this particular case is valid in South Africa any more than it would be in my home country, Ireland, in Europe. And that is because the POPI and POPI here and GDPR in Europe may make this type of thing difficult. However, in the US, this is not really so much of an issue. And so I hold it up as showing the capabilities of AI. And this is to auto-adjudicate less complex short-term disability claims. And we have clients using that to identify claims with predictable outcomes and then auto-decision those claims. So it is possible, even in what we would consider the more complex part of our business, which is the adjudication and the assessment of income protection or income continuum kind of claims for short-term disability already. this is being managed automatically in the US by one or two insurers using AI. And a final example I'll give, which has, I think, quite strong universal applicability and could really work here as well, comes from Australia, where one of our clients there is using AI together with the data from FINEOS to predict claim duration. And that has a number of possible benefits. One is it allows, at a simple level, for the better resources, the more experienced claims people to be devoted to the more thornier, potentially long duration claims. In particular, when you do this prediction of claim duration, you get a minimum date and a maximum date. And where that gap is greatest, again, you can apply your more senior claims people to manage that. And that has some benefits also for the claimant in that these individuals have greater authority to bring remedial efforts, to bring back to work efforts, to bring in extra resources to benefit the claimant, to help them on their journey. It's also helped in terms of early settlement of claims, which is if this insurer has found that you've a skeletal problem, you're going to be out of work for 43 days. We're going to now automatically pay you at 43 days. If that's not appropriate, come back and we'll restart a new claim at that point. And that has two benefits, in my view. One for the insurer in the sense that it saves them a bit of money because it's worth going through the claims process for 43 days. May not be worth it for an extra 1, 2, 3, 4 days. So if there is a mild overhang, often the claimant is dissuaded from claiming for that. But much more importantly, I think it gives the claimant a vision of the future where they will win. I'm going to beat my insurer. I'm going to get better sooner. And it gives them a goal and an ambition and a motivation, which has got to be good for them and for their family and for society. So I think the sorts of things are having really, I think, quite dramatic effects in our industry. If I just talk one last piece about integration and interoperability, again, this is key, where previously, if we throw our minds back 10 years, the systems that we used to run our business, really, if they integrated with other systems within our businesses. Nowadays, there are so many data sources out there, so many solutions that we may want to take advantage of. We need to make sure that everything that we have, both within that we're using and anyone we partner with, has APIs, both infrastructure APIs, but also engagement APIs. There's now talk about smart. My product colleagues at FINEOS are very proud of the fact that they're moving everything to smart connectors, which is a means by which you don't have to be as precise around your engagement over the API. And then, of course, standardization on data formats and exchange formats really will dramatically improve the speed by which multi-party processes can be handled. And again, there are certain standards, as there are accord standards, for example, in the US. But I see a growth in the standards industry as data is interchanged between organizations. And then finally, there's got to be standards and protocols about how to go about it. Then we come to the piece of user experience and automation. And I put these two things together because actually automation leads to a better user experience. The best user experience I've had using any system by filling out a form is to simply not have to do it. Is for it just be done without me knowing about it. So I put user experience and automation together there. Not everyone does that, but in my personal view, I think that's the right way. And here there's a piece around, it's got to be designed not from here is the capability of what systems we have. Let's express that to the outside world. We have to have a people first design. We need to have user interfaces which are intuitive, and we need to provide access based on roles into the data and systems that we operate. There has to be, obviously these have to be speedy because user expectation is that I get a speedy response as I do for my smartphone outside. And I can't have one set of experience expectations for most of my life. And then when I'm suddenly dealing with an insurance company, everything slows down. As many insureds have had to put up with over the last years. I go to Amazon.com to buy a pair of shoes and it's 2 clicks or whatever, and they're in the post to me. And then I go to my insurer to buy an insurance policy, and I fill something out and get to it. We're now going to go away and assess and think about your application, and we'll be back to you in days/weeks. That's very clunky. So performance optimization is not a technology piece. It becomes a user experience piece. There has to be also a consistent design language, and this then becomes key for an insurer. There has to be the way we deal with our clients, the language we use, the imagery we use, and the experience that we're going to give them. And then the last two pieces, as I say, are about workflow automation and event-driven automation. The best thing is, one of my pet hates, and apologies, this is almost like therapy for me here, so sorry about that. There's 100 and something people listening to me on my psychiatrist's couch, but the piece that drives me mad and drives everyone mad, I suspect, is where you're asked to provide information that you've already provided to another party, to your insurance company, but to any company. If that information is already there, or if you provided it 4 screens back, the idea of putting it back in again just is horrendous. We need to automate an awful lot of that. And it's not an area where we as an industry, have been very good. And this is my final point. Security and compliance. This is quite rightly a growing topic. The amount of data that is out there on us as humans, as businesses, the number of bad actors out there have meant that we really have a stronger burden than ever as the custodians of our clients' data to make sure that only those who have a right to see it can see it, that there's authentication authorization, that it's encrypted in flight and rest, but also to make sure that we're keeping current, that we're patching as known threats emerge, that there are regular audits and testing, and that everything we do is compliant with GDPR. I mentioned GDPR and POPI, but also with HIPAA and other pieces of compliance. In Europe, there's an emerging one, DORA, about operational resilience. And then we need to be able to respond quickly to any breaches. Again, I would put out there that this is becoming such an important topic and a strong topic that actually it is probably best left to partner vendors who are able to set up a system to manage this for multiple organizations so they can do it for their customers, rather than having each organization try to do that for every system they have themselves. With that, I'd say I thank you for your patience and your time, and I hope at least some of that was helpful or useful.